Thank you very much for coming to this roundtable. Very happy to be here in Lille, although the weather isn't too fantastic, but that's okay. We're inside anyway. So this session is going to be about CVD, Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure. I'll give you a summary of the roundtable as it is written. Many organizations are advocating for coordinated vulnerability disclosure policies. The aim is to provide a responsible and public framework for the search for vulnerabilities by ethical hackers for the benefit of an organization responsible for the security of its systems and to strengthen or create mutual trust between these actors. Beyond the bug bounty platforms, CVD programs are structured at the regulatory level by 2 ISO standards, but are not yet generalized or harmonized. This is due to users' lack of knowledge of the rules of engagement that govern these activities, the fact that some companies are still insufficiently aware of the need to patch vulnerabilities detected in their software, and the heterogeneity of the processes specific to each organization. Faced with this, how can we build confidence in these new vulnerability disclosure policies? How can they be better harmonized? What are the means and best practices for generalizing the implementation of these programs? And how can we ensure their level of reliability and evaluate their effectiveness? Should we move from CVD to multi-party coordinated vulnerability disclosure? That's another sort of leading question there. So, quick introductions to set the scene on who is sitting here in front of you. My name's Nick Kelly. My day job is helping build a secure coding training platform, but that's not the reason that I'm here. One of my other hats is as a board member for a non-profit member network called Sion. We have a couple of hundred people, generally quite experienced people in technology, cyber, and we work on interesting projects, one of which has been over the last year, since the last FIC, an initiative to help strengthen, enhance legislation, not us specifically, but help build support for an initiative by the OECD, to enhance legislation for bona fide ethical hackers and better define safe harbor. And so with the power of our network, we've been able to, I guess, rally people to the cause, get interest there, and try and build an association in support of an OECD initiative, which is something that we'll get into with one of the speakers, the speaker sitting next to me, Laurent. So that's the reason I'm the moderator in this chair. We'll pass it over to Octavia for her introduction, then Gilles, then Francois, finally Laurent, and then we'll get stuck into some key issues that we'll be discussing during the day. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Octavia de Weert. I'm General Director of MBIP, which it's a very short abbreviation for a long name, which has in itself the whole spectrum of what we're doing. We're delivering services for internet providers in the Netherlands. We're based in the Netherlands. And at this point, we've been doing this for 20 years. We're a not-for-profit organization, a foundation. We've been founded 20 years ago out of an initiative of the providers themselves who were running into a various of problems on delivering their services on the internet. Where at this point we're delivering 3 main services, one of them which is a very strong DDoS mitigation platform. So we're a bit of a strange organization because we do run high-tech services for providers and hosting providers and cloud providers in Netherlands and Europe. But at the same time, we are sitting in between governmental and our own culture of our own sector in trying to make the bridge between in this kind of problems like we've been talking about. On the CVD point of view, we're strong advocates of public and private cooperation. We have been at the basis of a few of those very successful cooperation organs in the Netherlands, in which we can see the strength of commercial, government, non-for-profit platforms as we are, who come and stand together to solve some very big issues. in the Netherlands and in Europe and the world. One of them was like the DDoS coalition, for example. In the Netherlands, we have an anti-abuse coalition at the moment, who is one of the main items is distribution of disclosing the right information to the right people at the right time. So it's a lot of a broad approach of how can we make each other stronger in this new era of cyber threats we are living in. Well, we'll get into that. That's my main item for today. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Gilles Lyonnais. I'm a CTO of YesWeHack, a company funded by hackers in providing services of bug bounty and vulnerability disclosure policy.
I'm François-Régis Vigneault. I'm working in the French General Staff and under the authority of the Cyber Commander. For him, I'm responsible for two main aspects, which are the information and insurance. The second part is defensive cyber operations. Mainly, and so I've been working in this area since now quite a few times. And so it's one of the reasons just because we have to deal with the at least with the armed forces are first one client of systems, and so on the second one we have some other functions for which we need also to have vulnerabilities at our disposal. Okay.
Good morning. So I'm Laurent Bernard. I work at the OECD Secretariat. So in a nutshell, I'll tell you what the OECD is. I'm sure you know the acronym, but apart from that, it's an intergovernmental organization based in Paris. So we work for governments. I work in the Secretariat of the OECD, supporting the organization, and I work in the area of cybersecurity. We call it digital security because for us, it's an economic and social matter, and we know it's not only an economic and social matter, but for us primarily it's an economic and social matter. And so the OECD works on policy issues, public policy issues, again from the economic and social perspective, and we've been working on cybersecurity for many years, or digital security for many years, and over the last 2 years we started to work on vulnerabilities, 2 or 3 years actually. We started to work on vulnerability and vulnerability disclosure. We thought it would be easy because it's an area where the technical community has been very active over the last, I don't know, maybe 20 or more years. So an easy thing to do to kind of translate this situation, this technical context to policymakers for them to try to help the situation. And we found in our work that it's a more complex situation than what we thought. It's actually a very complex topic, very difficult, not so easy to translate for policymakers. I'm turning to you to, should I continue? Or do you want me to continue? Because I could talk about this for 2 minutes.
You'll have that chance. I mean, that's good. We've got a great mixture of backgrounds here on stage, so I think we're set. So to kick things off, I'm going to pass it to Gilles, CTO at YesWeHack. Maybe to set the scene, a quick overview of the evolution of CVD as you've seen it from both sides of the fence.
Okay, so first to draw a landscape, vulnerabilities can affect both users' security, of course, but also vendor reputation. And CVD is the only way to transform this risk into an opportunity to build trust. So basically, there's 2 ways to achieve CVD. First one, black bounty, where you'll reward hunters when they report vulnerability. So you encourage them to hack on your system and provide them rewards. The other way is called VDP, Vulnerability Disclosure Policy, where you only welcome and thank the vulnerability reported. and engaged not to prosecute the researcher having reported, and of course fix it afterwards. We may be skeptical about the VDP, interest of VDP, because why a hunter, why a hacker would report vulnerability freely? Why would he want to help organization? Just to put a figure to illustrate it, we run a free service called Zero Disclose, a website where anyone can report vulnerabilities when they do not have, when they fear prosecution, or when they do not have any VDP provided on internet. They can report this vulnerability and send it confidentially, anonymously, directly encrypted from their browser to a CERT, a computer emergency response team from any nation, so that the bug is treated. So in this service, we received last year more than 100 reports. So it works, and many hackers are willful to help and to report the bugs they noticed on an association or a non-profit website, help the community. So we at Yes We Hack offer both VDP and bug bounty solution, and we have observed a growing concern and interest from organizations to work with this community, to benefit from it, and to do so, it's not that simple, and it requires support, of course, something we also provide, but first of all, it requires to understand which are the requirements and concerns of both sides. Researchers, what do they want? First, they want not to be prosecuted, of course. They want to be useful, so they need feedback on what they are doing, on how the bugs were treated, when they were fixed. They want to be useful. Case of a bug bounty, of course, they also seek rewards, but they also always look after fun. They want to learn some things. Companies, on their side, of course, want to improve security, but their concern is also to control disclosure. They want this quite sensitive information to be kept, to be controlled by them. And most of all, the thing we frequently hear is that they do not want to throw the cat among the pigeons. Kind of as if opening to hackers would be a supplementary risk. It is not, in fact, because it only provides a way that hackers will report you and not be frustrated and drop it to on the old internet. So what is needed to do that? First, display clearly, honestly, the rules of the VDP. First, say what will be allowed, what is not, what is the safe harbor, this condition on which you won't prosecute researchers when they acted on good faith, which is reporting vulnerabilities before, of course, exploiting it, before and not drop it or disclose it on Twitter or anything. What will be rewarded or not rewarded, very important, to clearly state that and to say which is the framework under which the reporter will report his vulnerability. Second condition is to provide a secure channel, granting both confidentiality and, if the hacker wants it, anonymity. For that, the best solution is to directly encrypt inside your browsers to the recipient's email or platform. And I would say the main trend we observe, and most important thing, is to separate bug bounty and VDP. They are not the same things. It's very important to say that. And we observed, sadly, a trend to bug bounty. What we call bug bounty is when malicious people ask for a bounty and saying, I will report you vulnerabilities, you pay me first. And it's something quite dangerous, close to ransom process. And in many cases, they do not even have any vulnerabilities on your system. And the only way to clearly, not completely prevent it, of course, but not to encourage it, it's clearly separating bug bounty and VDP. Do not put it in the same website, on the same URL, on the same platform. Clearly draw a line between them, because if the lines are blurred, you'll have big bounty. You'll have people wishing to report, to hunt on your system, which is not what you want when you set up a VDP. You just want people to report it if they find something. And so you need to draw a line to have something completely different. You can benefit from the same back office, but do not show the same facade, the same face to internet. So everything, it's not such an easy goal, but luckily solutions have emerged. First one is security.txt standard, RFC 9116, released this year, I think, where you just need to put a simple TXT file at a well-known place of parts of your website, well-known /security.txt, and saying what will be the email where hackers can report vulnerabilities, what will be the PGP key, and many very simple information to start a simple VDP, or simply to link, to backlink to your more complete VDP. You also need, we also have, I forgot something.
We forgot to give you the translation kit. If you mind, if we take a minute to give for everyone translation kit, French to English, English to French. Yep. Do you need any? Does anyone need a translation kit? C'est bon? Okay. I'm very sorry. No, thanks.
No problem. Well, so on security.txt, we run another free website called Firebounty, which is a free CVD aggregator, and we inventoried more than 25,000 security.txt on the internet. So it's something very widely used, very simple and widely used to display a VDP and to start a VDP. Other solution that has emerged, that turnkey solution, as the one we provide, which provide you with state-of-the-art rules and conditions you can freely customize, with forms, with structured and standard ways to collect reports, and a back office, a complete back office, allowing you to treat the vulnerability according to the ISO standard and to integrate with your bug tracker and to fully achieve DevSecOps. So it's something, of course, we provide to our customers, and I can also announce that we will release the open source version on September, so to provide the opportunity for anyone to have the simple VDP with a turnkey website running on their server. And so to end, the result of all of this is that we observe more and more VDP with security.txt, with solutions such as ours, and the results is that we have less and less reports on zero disclose, so as I talked earlier, which is a good news because it shows that hackers find their ways to report directly to vendors, which is what we want to achieve.
Thank you very much for that. There was something you said in the beginning about vendor reputation. So I hazard a guess that this is a kind of sea change over the last number of years where vendors are embracing a level of transparency, but not all vendors yet. No. Far from it. Yeah. Okay. Also the RFC, fantastic idea, and that's been in the pipeline for, what, 10 years or something? I can't recall. But
yeah, Head Overflow wrote it years ago.
Years ago, and finally that's got passed, so excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Colonel Francois Vignon. We're talking here about VDP, CVD, in the context of vulnerabilities being discovered by researchers and then submitted for patching. Of course, there are multiple incentives within government organizations, and I'm curious to understand areas of trust and harmonization, which were referenced by Gilles, how your division, your department handles that, and what your perspectives are.
In fact, the government may have two main different approaches regarding vulnerabilities. First one, for different purpose, they would need to have undisclosed vulnerabilities at their disposal, not only for armed forces, but also for Justice Department or the interior security forces. And on the other hand, the government is also a user of systems, and like that, it wants its information to be well protected. And in order to achieve this aim, the vulnerability disclosure is one key point, because if the vulnerability is disclosed, it will be able to be corrected. So the level of security of systems will be can be kept at the right level. And so this situation could be a little bit schizophrenic at some time, but the idea is to assess for each vulnerability if what is the best trade-off. So basically, when we have a vulnerability regarding what is the system impacted, or what is the span of its distribution. The main question is how long could this vulnerability stay only available for us? Or can we imagine that some other countries or some other services which are not dumber than us can reach this system and this vulnerability, and if they reach it, may we be exposed to it? And so it's the reason why we need to integrate fully in the trust, the common trust community around this subject. So we need the main vulnerability to be corrected for sure, and that's one of the key points. And so for vulnerability to be corrected, we have two main phases. The first one is to discover the vulnerability, but the second one is to, once the vulnerability is known, is to be able to correct all the system. So which means two things. So the patch exists, and we have time to deploy it and to test it before deploying it. So, and we have to keep in mind that it's real for government, but it's also real for big firms. The time to apply a patch could be discussed in weeks or even in months. So it's a big point because we have to deal with the agenda of vulnerability disclosure to be able to deal with that. Because as soon as the vulnerability is disclosed, moreover, if the vulnerability is disclosed with a proof of concept to exploit it, all the systems could be considered at risk, and it will be a race between the attackers and defenders for the attackers to be able to exploit the vulnerability before the system to be corrected. And so if the attacker is able to do that, maybe he will be able to set access to remain even when the vulnerability will be corrected. So it's really a main goal for the attackers to be able to exploit this vulnerability window as soon as the vulnerability is disclosed. But to build the common trust, we have to keep in mind that the different stakeholders have different approach. First one, the builder. As it has been said, the main goal for the builder is to to maintain its reputation. So it's really a reputation goal. For the vulnerability finder, we have two kinds of aim. The first one, but generally it turns around the communication. So the vulnerability finder needs to communicate around its discovery, either because it's let's say in the academic community, and its aim is to publish its work and around this disclosure. So because in the academic community, the key is to communicate to exist, mainly because everything comes from the communication, reputation, and these kind of things. Or it will be for other person to communicate in order to establish their level in the community, and so like that they will be able to have some return because their vulnerabilities, their discovery will assess they are at the right level, and like that.
Yeah, I think
they
for
will,
the recording.
Yeah, okay. And because they are able to set that they are at the right level, they will be able to be recognized, or to have some more fruitful aspect like contracts maybe behind. And so for the finder, so the key point is the communication. So they need to communicate on their work. For the clients, the main point for him is to be protected. So the vulnerability has to be corrected, and he needs to apply this correction on its system. So what we can see is that all these objectives can be in concurrence, because if the communication happens too early, so the system won't be protected, and so it will be difficult, and maybe the reputation of the builder could be impacted also. So it's the reason why I was saying that the agenda is of essence in this kind of things. As we said, we need time to develop the correction, and to develop the correction, the best thing is to rely on the vendor, because he's supposed to be the one who knows the best system. So for him to develop the correction means he will have to take some resources to make this development, and so it will cost him a little bit, and so the only thing he has to gain in that is to keep its good reputation. So sometimes to develop the correction can be in concurrence with develop new functionalities to broaden its clients. So it could be the trust we need to build with him is that he will be able to give the proper resources to be able to deal with all this, all the vulnerabilities which will be discovered. And so one other thing is, because he knows well its system, he may be able also to give recommendations for mitigation procedures during the time between the patch publication and the effective application of the patch on the system. Because generally what will be the good thing is the disclosure to be done after a patch exists. But nevertheless, if we do that, we need also the time to apply the patch, which could take weeks or months, as we said before. And so we need to have, because the vulnerability will be public at this time, we need time and we need mitigation procedure to be able to reduce the vulnerability target during this vulnerable time until the patch application. And basically, once again, it's a vendor which is the best place to give recommendation because he knows what its system is, and before the disclosure, he has been able to test something, and he has worked on the correction. So it's the one who has the whole picture on what can be done and what is maybe not a so good idea to perform. And nevertheless, it's what I just described is the ideal case where we have the trust and everyone is doing his job. But we can't rule out that sometimes maybe the priority of the vendor would be an other point than to develop a correction or to deal with the vulnerability because he has other priorities on its agenda, and we can't do anything about that. But we have to treat the situation, and we have to treat the situation mainly because we have two risks. The first one is the risk of coming from the discoverer, which can generate frustration from the discoverer because mainly what he has done it, as it has been said, because he wants to be useful, and he has worked freely to give all the information. And so if nothing is done, at some point, he may be a little unnerved by the situation. And so in the worst case, he could decide to disclose everything like that. And it's the worst case because nobody will win in this case.
How do you manage that?
I never had to go at this point. So we had to proceed as intermediate, just to stress the importance to publish, not to publish at the time for the discoverer, and to take the vulnerability into account by the vendor. And it's the reason why the trust among the three main stakeholders is important, because in this case, the client may have some arguments to the vendor to take the vulnerability into account, and so it could be a good point to go a little further and a little to speed up the process. And so the other main risk is the vulnerability to be discovered by somebody else, which could be not in the same mindset, and the vulnerability to be disclosed at the time where you have a vulnerability disclosed. You may have a proof of concept, but we have no remediation possibility, and for everybody it's really a big problem, because you have to work in a rush to find mitigation procedures, and all your systems are vulnerable, and you can't do anything about that, and it's not really a comfortable situation. So in the end, if the vendor doesn't want to hear, we will have to disclose this. I think we will really have to disclose, because if we don't do that, the next time the vendor will have no reason not to proceed in the same way. And in disclosing the vulnerability, you expose your system, sure, but on the other hand, you put the pressure also on the vendor, and because he has its reputation assets, and if too many vulnerabilities are disclosed, and without him taking it into account, its reputation will suffer at the end. And the other one last thing is which could stress for the vulnerability treatment. It's for security aspects of security products mainly. is to encourage the vendor to go through framework as the ANSI visa, by example, because during the ANSI visa, they are looking for the ability of the vendor to deal with vulnerabilities and to treat them. So,
Thank you. That word came up again, reputation. It's a common theme, so we'll probably tap into that after Laurent and Octavia have given their piece. It is a common theme, and it's one that I guess is wrapped around the mentality and a perspective. Laurent, we've been doing joint presentations for a while, so take it away.
Right, so I'll tell you a bit more about our perspective at the OECD. So I said we work for governments, and exactly what you've described is exactly what we found. We found that it's, if you start to dig into it, it's a very complex topic. And so from a government perspective, the question you ask is, how could we as governments improve that situation through public policy? Where are obstacles that make things go wrong, where governments can help? And that was the question we asked at the beginning of a process that started a couple of years ago, where we involved many stakeholders, experts from all constituencies, businesses, civil society, governments, from OECD membership to discuss this issue. And we had a number of people from the technical community informing us, and very quickly, actually, as I said, I thought it would be easy because it has been studied for many years. And very quickly, we got some of these frank people telling us some truth that was a bit difficult. One was that it's not just a matter of 0 days. And it's a subject that has been framed in terms of 0 days for many years. And 0 days are an issue. I'm not saying it's not an issue of 0 days. It is an issue of 0 days, but not only, because from a public policy perspective, what a government wants is to reduce the level of risk at the end of the day, not just address one aspect of the issue. And if the 0-day challenge of the CVD is addressed, then you only have half of the problem, the other half being the need for the owners of the systems to use the mitigation and apply it in their systems to, let's say, patch, may not be a patch, but to fix, to resolve, to address the vulnerability. So the problem is broader than just 0 days, and actually what we found is that the terminology in this space is a little bit confusing because everybody is talking about vendors as being those who have to do something when a vulnerability is reported to them. And yes, well, the term vendor is problematic because you have open source in there, you have free products, what is really a vendor, you have intermediaries. Anyway, but we could live with that, but the problem is that the system owners, those who have to patch, they are not vendors. Well, maybe they are, but not vendors of the system they have to patch. I mean, they are just, it's patching their system. So the terminology doesn't work. And that was just one problem. We found many issues. I'm going to make it short because the list of problems is very long, and we have reports on the OECD website that you can check, oe.cd/security. You'll find the reports there. But one of the big lessons we learned is that it's not just a technical issue. And of course, it is a technical issue, so it can be addressed partly through technical solutions. And that's great, but there are obstacles that are not technical to address this issue. And some obstacles are actually cultural. Like when somebody reports a vulnerability to an organization, it is in the culture, it is not a positive thing. It is viewed as a threat, which takes us to the points that have been made earlier. It may, if it goes to the right person in the organization and it's a mature organization from a security standpoint, then great, But in most organizations, it's not the case. It may go to the communication department, to the legal department, or to an IT department who is not mature in terms of security. And that ends up being seen as a threat, and even if the researcher is in good faith, an ethical hacker, as we say, that's going to be treated as a threat, and he will be threatened, he or she will be threatened, which will create an incentive to either disclose without a coordination process or to go to the black market or the gray market, and that's not decreasing the level of risk. So that's the type of problem we found. And we found also that actually, well, to nail this one down, the vulnerabilities are not an issue because in the digital realm, there are vulnerabilities. It's a fact of digital life that you have vulnerabilities. What's the issue is to not address the vulnerabilities. So people should look at how they manage, handle, address the vulnerabilities rather than whether they have or not vulnerabilities, because they always have. And this is really a cultural thing that should go beyond the technical community to the business, the management, the leadership of organizations, which are all today using digital technologies for most of the time for just operating their companies, but also in their products, because we are in the digital transformation era. So that's one big issue. And that connected to the legal challenge that vulnerability researchers or ethical hackers are threatened, not systematically, of course, some don't do that, and that's good, but sometimes they are threatened of legal proceedings, which has, again, many side effects, and it should not happen. And to fix that, there should be a legal environment which does not allow for that, or which allows for actually protecting the security researchers. And that's an area where governments can do something. They can fix the legal environment. They can do that. Another aspect is, and that will be just the third one, another challenge is that, well, you mentioned the schizophrenia of governments earlier, and that's exactly that, is that we thought governments would help address this issue and make progress, which they certainly will, and no problem with that. But they're also part of the problem because, yes, sometimes they identify or they find through different means vulnerabilities which they weaponize for their own use. Whether it's a legitimate or illegitimate use is not a point for discussion for me, but it creates a trust challenge among the community of researchers and even the business community, and we have to live with that, and it's complex. And it's an issue that was difficult to even mention in an OECD official setting, let's say 3 years ago, and we managed to actually address it and have a frank conversation on this among all the stakeholders. So that's making a lot of progress. And so in the end, we had a number of findings, and I'll make that short. We managed to have a consensus among OECD membership to actually develop an OECD recommendation, council recommendation based on these findings, whereby OECD governments, I was going to say commit, but it's not a treaty, so it's a non-binding instrument. It's soft law, but OECD governments, well, I'm going to say commit, but they don't commit. I can't find the other way.
Delete it from the recording.
Right, well, edit the recording. Agreed to do their utmost to follow a set of of principles to develop public policy in this area, which will be in that recommendations. And so there are mainly 5 areas. One is governments should clarify the responsibilities there. Just as I said, you have code owners and they have to do their homework of developing the patches and all that. And you have system owners and they have to patch. Now, it's complex. We know it's complex for both actors. But these are the responsibilities. Don't ignore one, address the two in terms of public policy. And you have security researchers, and they also have responsibilities. It's not that you can do whatever you want. Ethical hacking, there is the word ethical. What does that really mean is a question. How are you ethical? Where is the document that I can use to check whether I am ethical or not? Doesn't exist today. It's very hard. So we need to develop that well, the community needs to develop it, and it's part of the work. Governments should develop public policies that mainstream good practice among all stakeholders, and that's one area. And one area for that is the government itself adopting good practices. It's one thing we've seen in the US, for example, with a directive issued by DHS, I think a couple of years ago now. There is a side to it which is kind of at the center, which is the need to develop safe harbors for ethical hackers, for vulnerability researchers who follow good practice, which raises the question of what are these good practices, but we have to work on this. And another aspect is the trust issue. Governments have to create trust. Well, yeah, all stakeholders have to create trust. And how to do that is, there are some aspects in the recommendation that address that. One challenge is, of course, for governments to ensure that vulnerability information that will be reported to them by ethical hackers are not misused by the government itself. And how do they do that? How do they create trust will depend in each country. There's another aspect, which is international cooperation, because the issue cannot be addressed only by a single country. Vulnerabilities are identified across countries, products are global, value chains are global, so this needs to be an international framework, which is where the OECD also has a role. So that's pretty much where we are. And the recommendation is currently, it's a draft recommendation. It's pretty mature. Actually, it's almost over. The process is almost over. It will be launched at an OECD ministerial meeting on the digital economy, which will take place in December in Spain. It will be launched with other recommendations, but we hope that this will be an important moment for the community to actually, well, for the technical community to have a more fruitful dialogue with the policy level across OECD countries and beyond, because non-OECD countries can also adhere to OECD recommendations, and they can even follow the good practice without adhering if they want. So we hope it will be an international policy standard that will be useful.
So you also mentioned governments building trust and the OECD steering away from the terminology of cybersecurity and adopting a digital security, adopting the term digital security. How does that gel with the necessities of government from a national security cyber perspective?
So that's the question that is tricky. It's tricky for everyone. It's tricky for governments. It's tricky for the community. It's very complicated. It's an issue that we see in other areas, such as the regulation or deregulation of cryptography. Typical. It's not a new issue. It's an old issue. And I would formulate it in terms of how do the government demonstrate that it can be trusted? What type of frameworks should the government have that create trust among the community, so that when the left hand of the government does something, the right hand says, yeah, we don't interfere with that because it will destabilize the trust. It's a complex challenge. It's addressed differently across countries. Some address it at the level of their institutional framework. In other words, they created an agency which is not addressing the offensive aspects, and they have like institutional barriers to prevent that. Others address it differently. It can be in the legal frameworks. It can be. I think one core element, I won't give a full response. I'll take you to the December moment and have a look at that section of the recommendation. So a bit of suspense there, but I think a key aspect is for the government to create, well, to not create, but to actually nurture or to help foster a community of stakeholders and address it like on a day-to-day basis. It's very important to have an ecosystem of stakeholders with close relationships between the government and the stakeholders. That's key. Some countries are very good at that. Others, well, it's taking more time.
Okay, and Octavia, I think focusing on the public-private participation would be one of the key aspects, and how you've managed to foster that, also the transparency theme that you're playing as well.
Yeah, thanks. Well, the good thing is being the last speaker is that you've heard so many things already, and it's really to the point. I got triggered by a few things that have been said until now, and first of all, Laurent, I agree totally that there is a very complex issue, which is not a technical complexity. It's very complex on ecosystem, because once you start talking about CVDs, you talk about the whole ecosystem of vendors, trust, culture. I mean, I'm talking about my own group of people which we represent. We're representing like 200 entities in the Netherlands who do their services on the internet, and I think we are we're talking about millions and millions of IP addresses being out there on the internet, which are possibly a target, you know. So it's a big community, and the community is very fuzzy. We talk about vendors, and I wish it was that easy. I wish there were a few vendors. I mean, the vendors you could address, you could regulate and say, well, just get your act together and we'll all be safe. But we're not, because we're talking about open source, about groups of volunteers who work on a lot of issues. And my point is not making the thing complex, but trying to work, or advocate a bit of a solution, is that we won't solve this. I think we will solve this. And I wasn't like, I didn't believe this a few years ago, but I do believe that we will solve this the same way that internet came to be. We are in it together. And if we want to keep it an open and free internet, we will have to address it that way. And not by totally regulating it, and not either by letting it all go, So not a whole organic thing happening. But it seems, it sounds like world peace, but how do we achieve that then? I really believe that what I'm talking about, government and public working together, these tables like we are here now should be the way to work, not only think about, but actually work towards a solution. And I think one of the solutions is actually making that ecosystem a little bit more, not a lot more if it was up to me, but transparent. Like you're finding, you're talking about, my people downstairs are, at this moment finding like millions and millions and millions of problems, I'm thinking, So what are we going to do with that big amount of data you researchers found, which is there, and then what do we do with it? And then, because one of the problems is, if I look at the technical guys, is the complexity, but also this huge amount. How are we going to manage that? Who has the teams capable of, hacking, but then patching what you're saying? And I think I really believe one of the solutions is really into that ecosystem, try to distribute that work to the right group of people. Like for example, what we are standing for now with the MBIP, we've seen this working together on a non-for-profit basis. It's been working for 20 years for a few items, and one of the big items coming up on our path is actually activating that community who needs to patch, because my community is great, but if I'm going out there, and we've been doing that for years, and say, well, Gilles has found like millions of problems into your network, I'm not, they won't like me anymore, It's really a problem, because, and I think you need a platform to distribute all this data you're founding. And we are trying to activate our community, which is really I believe into that, plugging into the community who can actually actively do something about it. If I'm going out there and talk to my end users, say, well, these systems are hacked, it won't help them, it won't help anybody. But if I'm talking to my community who are actually the providers who can fix things, they can patch, they can they manage these systems, exactly what you're saying, Laurent, they're part of this ecosystem, they're not the vendors, but they manage them. They manage the system, so they are the ones who actually can do something about it. And I think that's a big community. What we are trying to do with this new platform we are advocating at this moment, which we called Clean Networks, it's rewarding them to come in action and do something about it. How do we do that? For example, we say, well, you should adhere to a code of conduct, which we all set up together, and we say, we as a community we commit ourselves to patch everything we are informed about, which is a big step. It seems so obvious, but it's a big step to get that community active and actually committing itself to this code of conduct, saying, yes, I am, and just put my name on your website and tell the world that I'm the ones I'm the ones who receives that information. It's not a threat, but I think I should do something about it. It's a big thing. It's a cultural thing as well. And another thing is where I think your community should be very happy about, Gilles, is that we're saying we want to give you feedback about what's happening, because you're sending a lot of info to our community. And then that's the thing we always hear also from our Dutch people who are hackers who are informing us, like, what are you guys doing with that info? You know, because you can't, you could never be paid for all the amount of work you're doing. It's, I mean, of course, but you know, I think it's a lot of inside motivation. People are motivated not only by being paid or by the amount of hours they are being paid for, but they really want to be part of something good. I mean, we're getting to word peace immediately, but you know, so we're trying to activate. We have built up this platform, Clean Networks platform, in which we're automatically giving you feedback on every feed you're giving us. So we are actually giving you the information back we've been patching. This is our new, you know, this is the point, this is where we stand. And I think these are the small steps. We see ourselves as a small partner into this ecosystem. But the more we sit together and actually let the people into ecosystem do the thing they're good at, or address a part of the community which makes an impact, it will be, it eventually will have a huge effect.
I like the world peace aspect.
Yeah.
So that's the end goal. So we're moving toward the end of it, and now we'll open up in a bit more of a Q&A. But Gilles, I saw you nodding before. Did you have a point that you wanted to raise?
Yes, to answer one of your questions, but we can deal with such an amount of vulnerabilities and bugs. One of the key ways is about prioritization and integration. Achieving both, you can filter the one you need to handle quickly, and you can route automatically and directly integrate both developers and security guys, so that you have you can correct every bug. I agree, but there's a way to filter them, to focus on the most important.
Yeah, triage.
That's exactly triage and integration. And it's also a culture, I agree, integrating by tools and by process teams give great results, because developed code is better, it's fixed quickly, and something that very
totally
useful.
agree. Yeah, that's the whole point of what we said. You need a platform. You can't manage this by hand anymore. You need a platform. That's what we've been building, a platform which you plug in and say, because at this moment, our members, if they log in into our platform, they say, well, no, every day I'm logging in, I have a bigger problem. You know, I have to do something about this stuff, you know? And they're not and it's not a business case to be made of cleaning up your network or your vulnerabilities. There isn't. It's a lot of work. So I think, but I really do believe and agree, Jill, that we're moving into, I can't let it, but just intelligent platform who will be plugging into this. This is part of the solution. I agree, yeah.
So as we head toward the end, I want to flag two things. This roundtable is a discussion about CVD and also safe harbor. So skipping back to that, maybe Laurent, you could talk to the recent US DOJ announcement as a step potentially in the right direction. What do you think?
Sure. I've not studied it in details.
Okay.
So
putting you in the deep end.
Always happy to talk about one of my member countries' step in the right direction. So it's an example. So the Department of Justice, I think it's a statement.
Yeah.
It's a statement. Made a statement saying, and I'm going probably to be wrong in the term, so it's not a quote, saying that they would not
no longer prosecute white hat hackers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So which sounds like well, good news. So of course it's a step in the right direction, and I would take it to a higher level to say it shows also the complexity that we face internationally, because each country, if they want to better protect security researchers, they will have to find ways to adapt their legal frameworks to do so. And each country will have a different way to do it. So, for example, the Dutch have done an amazing job many years ago, actually, to do that. I think it went through a general prosecutor's guidance or directive. I forgot exactly that. It's in our report, of course, read the report. But it's very well, it works very well in the Netherlands. The problem is that you take that, you adapt it to France, it doesn't work because it's a completely different legal systems, and maybe it only works in the Netherlands. You could take it, think about it, and see what you could do in the same spirit in your country, and that's the way we want to go, and that's where the OECD is. So we'll look at the US step forward. Maybe there'll be more in the future. Look at what France is doing, what OECD members are doing, and trying to find commonalities at a higher level so that countries which are still on the way, most of them are still on the way. Actually, nobody has reached the ultimate framework, can take an OECD document and say, okay, now I have the concepts, I understand what I can do, and knowing my system, I can adjust my system to these concepts. And that way you have interoperability across the board, and a vulnerability researcher in one country will not be prosecuted when he reports vulnerability in another country, participating in this framework. So that's the idea.
And the initiative that we've been working on at CIAN is effectively trying to support the OECD in its goals by making enough noise so that this becomes a higher priority, which it certainly is if we see some of those reflections. And that's reflected by a statement being made by the US DOJ, which for years has been completely the opposite. So it certainly seems that there's a sea change, but it won't be immediate, and we do need to ensure that these topics of conversation keep on happening. I think we're about a minute away from finishing, so unless anyone else has any burning desire to add to the conversation, we probably have 30 seconds for a Q&A. Anyone got any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just wondering something because I do work for CERT for years, and I've seen a move from the, I would say, responsible vulnerability disclosure to coordinated vulnerability disclosure, because it's kind of hiding things, I would say, behind the bush. Because if you look at carefully at what is going on, it's basically the commercialization. So vulnerabilities are basically driving up markets and so on that are nowadays a kind of issue for many sorts at national levels, where basically you cannot compete with basically not only black market, but grey and white market, even bug bounties, to basically tackle with the vendors and so on. And usually bug bounties programs are used as kind of buffering methods to hide really the things that are going on and so on. And I could mention a ton of examples about that. So I'm just wondering if it's policy-wise, we should not go into a way of limiting or either limiting the economical aspect of, I would say, vulnerability trading or broking, or not focusing on the economical aspect of the vulnerabilities, but more on the fixes. So that means you create an economical incentive on the fixes themselves, which is currently one of the issues. Is basically we put kind of a lot of money into the vulnerability disclosure process, but not in the fixing aspect, which is, I think, an issue. And even for some bug bounties programs, we can see that, where the focus is only on the result and vulnerabilities, but not really on the fix itself.
That's a really good point, and it's a switch in mentality. Have you seen models that have been countries, models that reflect that?
Okay, yeah. Well, that's exactly one point I was trying to make. Is you have to reward the fixing. You have to coordinate the fixing. That's what the point we're trying to make. We're making this project, and we are part of, in which we say to the ones who can fix, like my community is a community who is able to fix what's happening, patches, saying, well, I'm working on a project now with the government, which we say, we're working to rewarding the ones who are actively fixing and actively involve themselves into these programs. For example, by giving them a kind of, let's say, a certificate of you're a good citizen, more or less. It's a soft certificate, and say you're achieving your strive. We started with this adhering to the code of conduct, in which we say you are the good guys. You are in a hall of fame of the good guys of the clean networks, and then moving from that towards reward them with a certificate of safe networks, something like that. Yeah.
Well, still got a massive economic incentive on the other side, which is the rub, I guess. Gilles, Laurent. Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending. I think you were mentioning a link. We'll put the if anyone's interested, please ask us for the details after. But thanks for attending.